Another part of what they told us that stands out is that the Anasazi were obsessed with ravens, and possibly crows as well, and a lot of their superstition revolved around massive raven people and people with raven heads, stuff like that. I completely forget all the other details at this point, as it was well over a decade ago. Anyway, my tent mate is a bit slow, and is also very allergic to peanuts. He ends up eating some of the pre-packaged food that contains a copious amount. That, combined with the ongoing poor plannings, fear of bears, and sloppy leadership, causes the adults to decide to camp out on the plateau rather than keep going. On this scout march, you're only supposed to camp outside the designated areas and never on the particular plateau, just because of the geography and the environment. But forget the rules, because we do anyway. We set up camp, eat, lay the bear bag, and head off to sleep. That night, though, was the craziest thing. I could hear so much thunder, and so could my tent mate, but absolutely no rain, like insanely loud. My tent mate and I were terrified. It could have been heat lining, but it sounded impossibly close. We're terrified. He, the braver one of the two, actually goes out to check. As he opens the flap, I see the forest behind him. He comes back a few minutes later, and the thunder pretty much stops at the same time. He looks at me and goes to bed without saying anything at all. It's not unusual in itself. He could be pretty slow and non-social, and likely had mild autism in hindsight. But the next day, we wake up and a ton of things popped red flags. Firstly, our tent is facing an open field, which is very strange, because yesterday we both saw Forrest from when he left the tent to check. Second, no one else heard lightning that night, except for us, which was absolutely crazy as it was loud enough to wake everyone on Earth. Remember how my tent mate checked out the thunder as well? Well, he had no recollection of what he saw. He woke up confused, saying that the last thing that he remembered was just stepping outside. The good part though, the guy in the tent next door brought this up before we did. He also decided to get up and check it out, and he claims that when he stepped out of the tent, there were no trees anywhere, just extremely long, tall pole objects, almost as if there were thousands of stilts. When he looked up, he also said that there was no lightning visible, but it was super bright, full moon on steroids bright. He also claimed that he had seen flying, winged, pitch black objects, bigger than cars, and they looked like they had wings on them, and that they were round. He dove back inside and doesn't remember going to sleep or the noise going away. Remember the giant raven myths? I did, and I was scared shitless. I wouldn't have believed him if I hadn't have seen the trees and heard the thunder for myself. About 10 years ago, I was working as a private investigator. It sounds cool, but it actually isn't. You spend about 3 to 5 hours each day driving to your cases, stake them out in a blazing hot car with the engine off for 8 hours, and then spend 1 to 3 hours in a hotel room writing up your reports before finally getting some sleep and doing it all over again. I did this job for about a year after completing my training to be a medic in the Army Reserves.
Princess.
I was young at the time, so the idea of making 50
Yes. Oh.
No.
Okay,
Hey,
I just calmed on Princess. Oh, I gotta go for a minute.
The laundry desk.
His mom came into his room.
Oh, Princess, how old are you, bud? Oh.
11.
Okay, you're good then. Oh.
Just kidding.
How old are you really, though?
I'm 15.
in there.
Boy, how's it going?
116, so it's alright.
Long time no talk.
Oh, fuck Donnie. I'm gonna fuck you, Donnie. Oh,
Donnie's fucking mine to fuck you, little fuck. Donnie's mine. Oh, God.
What is going on here, mate?
this is my friend.
Uh-oh.
It just got really fucking loud.
Matt, you think you can just play piano, man? Play piano, man. Play piano.
Oh, I have so many fucking fans. Oh my god. Oh my god, yes. Oh.
So,
My sister is like gonna walk in and it's gonna be so nice. I can have a threesome.
Oh.
and you see, this is why I don't want to visit America. I think, you know what? I think I found out why abortion's legal.
Do you
Fuck is
live
you?
in Alabama?
I do live in Alabama. I'm fucking my cat right now.
That's Asians people.
Muy bueno pussy, nigga.
Okay, I'm done acting.
Asians people's dinner. Why are you doing that?
What the fuck? I'm getting so many fucking DMs for this shit. There's like 30 people talking to me right now. They're like, what the fuck?
Guys.
Oh fuck, I'm done. I'm done playing around. Princess, you should have me as a friend, dude.
What?
Why?
I'm kind of scared. Who are you friends with?
Dude, I can send a fucking picture of myself.
Dude, he sent me this like video of people stomping on live animals and killing them. Fucking cats everywhere.
This is Ziri.
Yeah.
Ow.
Not sure if you wanna add Celtic. Do not
I'm
add
actually
Celtic.
pretty
Not a
chill.
good idea.
No, so
Did you see it? TY?
Oh, you look like an Alabama.
boy, you are.
Alabama.
Well,
Boy, princess.
Hey, why'd you send it?
Boy, princess.
Yes.
Hey guys.
well, you said I don't look good, so.
Hey guys, I'm looking for a wife, guys.
Hello guys, I'm looking for husband.
Oh my god.
What are you talking
So,
Oh my god,
He's looking for a husband.
My dad left.
तेरी माँ दी हरामजादी कुत्ती
Haram Jadi, it's a new one.
तेरी माँ दी कुत्ती
Yeah, what happened to what's his name?
Yes,
Jesus.
Yo. Celtic.
You guys should look up the Chris Watts case.
what?
Oh, I know that.
Oh, what is it? What is it?
He like killed his family.
And he buried them in his workplace.
Yeah.
That's
He shoved
me
them in the
fucking
oil
wrong,
tank.
man.
Wait, what's her name? Chris
Oh yeah,
song?
yeah. Yeah, I've seen this before. I've
And it's
seen
like it happened last summer. Like it was
Yep.
the whole thing's on tape.
Oh yeah, that's
What
my
is it
dad.
called?
Oh, it's your oh fuck. He's handsome.
I'm kidding.
Thank God he's educated now. Fell for that one.
I'd be dead if he was my dad, wouldn't I? Except that I could probably beat him up. He was a little bitch anyways. Mr. Watts, I mean, he's like a skinny little piece of shit. Probably 3'7". Short.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Wait,
yeah.
what's her name?
What?
What was the
Chris-
guy's
Chris Watt?
Chris Watt?
Yeah. He was a shitty criminal too. It's so fucking obvious that he'd done it. He didn't even like fucking.
Yes.
Do you see it, Chief?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Height.
August 13th. I remember the day that happened. I saw it on a news thing.
The guy from Colorado.
Christopher Lee Watts. Yeah, Frederick, Colorado.
Okay, so he's 5'11".
What is happening? Why is my computer fucking breaking?
Because it's
Because you're
broken.
like Celtic and you bit your mic.
What?
Oh, you don't understand. He masturbated in this too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's just Discord is like lagging a lot, so I don't know what's going on.
Maybe it's just that. This is ear rape after all, so.
Ear rape. You guys want to say the N word in Unity?
On autism.
Alright, in 2, 1. Alright, I'll say the other one.
Howdy, nigger.
Did you guys know I'm a motorcycle? Yo, my engine broke.
New.
The fart. Not the fucking board.
What about
Hey,
my motor?
princess.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be my girlfriend?
No.
Fuck off, bitch. Oh my god, what is that? This guy's emo. Yo, dude, your mom's gonna come upstairs and beat your little ass.
Shut the fuck up.
Jesus. Shut up, you little shit.
Yeah, you
Little screamo sounded ass, bitch.
What is this little emo snack doing?
Little kids when they touch the top of the frame.
Listen to me, you fucking nigga. Listen to me, you fucking song.
Yo, eat your fucking fried lasagna.
Fuck up, you stupid ass nigger.
Like, you know what's funny about liberal pussy? You'll see. Dude, you're a queer.
You know, why
Bro,
guys are such database?
Osama, shut up.
Listen to me. Wait, what?
Dude, hey, black and acid, bro. Tell that Indian to leave me alone.
I don't feel
Use
so good.
like the fucking weird voice again. The one you used to say Tyrone is here to fuck your wife. Say my penis is huge.
My
didn't finish it there. Lasagna. Say it. Say it.
Say what?
Say muy bueno putiniga.
Mr. So good, I don't feel so good.
Muy bueno.
There's a Mexican in the background, and he's like, stop being loud.
That's my pet dog. I ate him for dinner, but he's still making noises.
Damn.
Deep in my stomach.
Oh my god.
Say muy bueno pusiniga.
I got niggers picking cotton in my motherfucking field.
I got slaves. I got the fucking Jews in the oven.
Say my vagina is.
Y'all ever played?
Lasagna.
Say.
Yeah, and travelling all over the country whilst living out of a suitcase seemed appealing to 19-year-old me. As I said before, you spend a lot of time driving around in areas you're not necessarily familiar with. On one of those late nights, I found myself driving onto a twisting mountain road just outside of Taos, New Mexico. The area was heavily wooded with narrow roads that curved sharply, without a lot of places to turn off, since you were driving up and around mountains and forests. In the middle of the night, as I maneuvered my rental vehicle through a curve, I saw a woman stumbling along the side of the road carrying a small child. The sight caught me off guard and sent a shiver down my spine. It was so unexpected and so out of place. There were no houses nor buildings around me, and it was around 2 a.m. and pitch black. This unnerved me, but what sent the shiver down my spine was the way she moved. She lurched along with what I can only describe as a shuffle, straight out of a George Romero zombie flick. And she didn't look up or acknowledge me as I drove by. She just stared aimlessly at the road in front of her. You have to remember that I was 19 years old, and fresh out of a year of extensive army training. I was in peak physical shape, and I thought I was Billy Badass at the time. I had spent a month working in trauma centers as part of my training, so I still don't often get freaked out or scared. But seeing this did scare me. I drove on for a minute or two thinking about what I'd just seen. Who was she? What was she doing here this time of night? How did she get here? The more rational part of my brain took over, and I came to a horrifying realization. I had been driving for about 1.5 miles past her, and I hadn't seen any homes nor businesses, nor had I come across any places to turn off since I had seen her. And it had been about 10 miles since I had come across a place to turn before I saw her. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. I realized that she had to be hurt or in trouble. Perhaps she'd been in a car accident and was in shock. What if the child she was carrying was hurt? I was a medic. I had trained for a year to help people. Sure, I was scared and unnerved. But how would I feel if they later died of exposure out on the mountain, and I was too much of a coward to go back and help? Wouldn't I also be scared the first time I saw combat, when my friends were depending on me? I had to man up and turn around. And as soon as it was safe, I did so. I drove back to where I'd seen her, half relieved and half horrified when I could not find her. I traced the road a half a dozen times. Where could she have gone? There was only a small area on the side of the road and guardrails for miles. I drove, turned around and drove, and turned around and drove, and turned around and drove again. I was obsessed with finding her. Part of it was out of concern for her child. Part of it was proving myself that I was doing the right thing, even though I was scared shitless. After a while, however, it became about me proving it to myself that I wasn't actually going insane. I spent hours looking for her. Eventually I stopped my car and started walking along the road, looking for any signs of her or any disturbance on the mountain to indicate that a vehicle had crashed off the road and down a mountain. I walked that entire 3-mile stretch of road in pitch black with a flashlight, at times yelling like a madman, listening to every twig and echo with bated breath. I didn't even care about my deadline or my next case. I was sure of what I saw. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't seeing things, and I wasn't overly tired. I saw her stumbling down that road, and there's no doubt in my mind. But there was nothing. Even when the sun came up and I drove to the stretch of road again half a dozen times, there was nothing. And there was no way for me to explain it, even after countless sleepless nights in the 10 years since devoted to it. I don't believe in ghosts. I saw this bullshit documentary and laugh away their evidence in stupid orbs like the rest of you do. But I also don't know where the hell the stumbling woman and her child came from, or where they went. So, on the off chance that you were stumbling down a windy road in Taos, New Mexico about 10 years ago with a toddler in your arms, please, tell me what happened, where you came from, where you went, and that you were both okay. I've been puzzled for a decade now. I used to regularly walk portions of the Appalachian Trail, and usually take a week or two by myself. Anyway, at one point I was coming over a pass and saw a figure on the trail ahead. Seems to be a lone young woman. It's twilight and the moon will be bright. I have solar rechargeable lamps, and I yell ahead, "Ahoy!" She doesn't break stride or pause. Being on the trail, people are friendly and cooperative. Looks like she's had a bad day, and no tent. Now sure, I like to sleep under the stars, and I usually hike with a hammock and a rainfly, but something seemed off. We were way out here. The last trail shelter was a few miles back, and we were on a very heavy bush cliff. Nowhere you want to camp for the night. I figure she might be wary of strangers at night, so I keep my own pace and don't really pay much more attention to her, until she disappears over the next pass, and I realize she's walking this trail. Now dark, with some moonlight but heavy tree cover, without a torch, lamp or any personal light source. I'm getting worried about this girl. Remember, we are walking with a sheer cliff face a few yards away from us, and conditions aren't perfect. Roots, dirt, mud, moss, rocks, anything can trip you up. So I pick up pace and hurry over to the pass. She's nowhere, and there's a clear line of sight probably 200 yards ahead, and she's nowhere to be seen. But then I see a torch in the distance. Red lamp. Actually, there's two now that I'm getting closer. I flash my torch, and they flash theirs. I call ahoy, and a man and woman respond. We finally meet up and do the whole meet and greet, exchange trail names and chat for a bit about what's ahead in our paths, since we were walking opposite directions. I say to the girl, "You worried me back there. I saw you walking without a light and then you disappeared over the pass. I'm sorry I spooked you. Didn't think you were that far off though. Must have run like crazy to cover as much ground." She looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I explained everything, and she said that she hadn't seen anyone on the trail for at least 3 miles. There was no one reported missing, no abandoned campsites, nothing. I followed up with state police and rangers. Nothing. Who the hell was on the trail ahead of me? Walking at night with no light, minimal gear, and then to just suddenly disappear when there's only one way to go along the trail? I'm still clueless. I used to work security, and several years ago I was assigned to a remote construction site where a summer camp was being built. It was quite literally in the middle of the woods, roughly 4 or 5 miles into the forest, with only a single access road that they'd been using to haul equipment and supplies and such. My job was to provide overnight security, doing a foot patrol of the entire area. The patrol covered around 2 miles